28 men were on a ship in the Antarctic Ocean when the ice closed around them. Not slowly, suddenly, millions of tons of frozen sea pressing against the hull from every direction, gripping the vessel, holding it completely still in one of the most remote and hostile places on the surface of the Earth. They had been trapped for 7 months when the noise came from below the hull one night. A violent sound. The ship lurched to one side. Nobody knew whether it had been struck by a whale or something else. What they saw the next morning made the question irrelevant. The rudder, without which the ship could not be steered, had been destroyed by the pressure of the surrounding ice. They were 2,000 kilometers from the nearest human settlement with no way to call for help and no way to move. Welcome to World Unveiled. This is the story the world calls the greatest survival story ever told. The man at the center of it was Sir Ernest Shackleton, a British explorer whose entire career had been defined by the gap between ambition and achievement. In 1901, he had come within 750 kilometers of Antarctica before turning back. In 1907, he had come within 150 kilometers of the South Pole before being forced to return. By 1914, he had decided that getting close was not enough. His new plan was to cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot. From one coast to the other, a distance of approximately 2,900 kilometers across the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. Nobody had done it. That was the point. The mission was called the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, and the advertisement Shackleton placed in the Times of London to recruit his crew was one of the most honest job postings in history. Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful. He received thousands of applications. He hired 27 men, bringing the total expedition size to 28, including himself. The ship he purchased for the voyage was called Endurance, built from American oak specifically to withstand the pressure of polar ice. It carried sails and a steam engine. It also carried 50 large sled dogs to pull equipment across the Antarctic ice once the landing was made. On December 5th, 1914, after months of preparation and transit through the Atlantic, Endurance entered the Weddell Sea, heading south toward Antarctica. 46 days into the Antarctic leg of the voyage, with land only 1 day away, the ice stopped them. The sea ice that year was unusually thick, in some places 18 feet deep. Endurance could not break through it. The crew spent days trying to free the ship manually, cutting at the ice by hand, achieving barely 300 meters of progress before the ice closed again around them. On February 14, 1915, Shackleton made the decision to stop fighting. He would let the ice hold the ship and wait for spring, when the natural melting might free them. He organized the crew into daily routines to maintain morale. They played football on the ice. They held regular discussions and lectures. They looked after the dogs. They cooked and ate together. They waited. Spring did not bring release. Instead, it brought pressure. As the ice began its seasonal movement in April 1915, the sheets began grinding against each other and compressing, transferring enormous forces against the wooden hull of Endurance. The crew worked for weeks to chip ice away from the hull to reduce the pressure. Then, on the night of July 14, 1915, the sound came from below and the ship lurched. Morning revealed the destroyed rudder. By October 1915, the situation had become criticky. Hell. A surge of pressure on October 18th tilted the ship 30 degrees. Water began entering through the cracks. The crew worked through the night to pump it out, but the damage was beyond repair. On October 27th, Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship. Essential supplies were moved onto the ice: food, the lifeboats, sleeping equipment, the dogs. And then, as the crew watched from the ice, Endurance was crushed by the pressure it had resisted for 9 months. The ship sank slowly into the Antarctic Ocean. The crew was now standing on floating ice with 3 small lifeboats, 2,000 kilometers from civilization, with no way to contact the outside world. The ice drifted. Shackleton had identified Paulet Island, approximately 550 kilometers away, as a possible destination. It had supplies cached there from a previous expedition. The crew began walking toward it, dragging the lifeboats behind them across the ice surface. After days of exhausting effort, they had covered barely 3 kilometers. The ice was too rough to walk on and too unstable to camp on safely. They stopped walking and camped on the drifting ice, letting it carry them. The ice moved in the wrong direction. Paulet Island receded. They hunted penguins and seals to supplement their dwindling rations. In February 1916, they were reduced to 1 biscuit per person per day. They killed the sled dogs for food. Still, the ice drifted, carrying them now toward Elephant Island instead of Paulet Island. In April 1916, 16 months after leaving the South Georgia whaling station, the ice broke up sufficiently for the lifeboats to be launched. In conditions of extreme cold and violent seas, with frostbite affecting multiple crew members and tongues so swollen from dehydration that swallowing was painful, they rowed and sailed the lifeboats through Antarctic waters until they reached Elephant Island on April 24, 1916. It was the first time in 16 months that any of them had stood on solid ground. Elephant Island was uninhabited and barren. It could not sustain them. Shackleton made the decision that no rational calculation of survival probability could fully support. He would take 5 men in one of the small lifeboats and sail 800 miles across the most dangerous ocean in the world to the South Georgia whaling station, where help could be summoned for the 22 men left behind. The James Caird, the largest of the 3 lifeboats, was 16 feet long. Shackleton and his 5 men crossed 800 miles of Antarctic Ocean in it, facing waves 90 feet high, temperatures far below freezing, and navigation by stars and sun alone because they had no other instruments. It took 16 days. They arrived at South Georgia on May 10th, 1916, but on the wrong side of the island. Between them and the whaling station stood a mountain range 4,000 feet high that no one had ever crossed. Shackleton and 2 of his men crossed it in 36 hours of continuous climbing. When they arrived at the whaling station, the workers there did not recognize them. A man who had left that same station 18 months earlier, clean and equipped, had returned barely identifiable as a human being. It took 3 more months and 4 rescue attempts before ice conditions finally permitted Shackleton to reach Elephant Island D. On August 30th, 1916, he arrived to find all 22 men alive. Every single one. 2 years and 22 days after leaving England, the entire crew of the Endurance was safe. Shackleton had never completed his mission. He had never crossed Antarctica. He had failed at the South Pole twice before this, and failed to reach Antarctica itself on this attempt. But he had kept 28 men alive in conditions that should have killed all of them. In 2022, 107 years after the Endurance sank, the ship was found on the Antarctic Ocean floor at a depth of 3,000 meters, perfectly preserved, its name still clearly readable on the hull. This is World Unveiled. The greatest survival story ever told is not about reaching the destination. It is about bringing everyone home. Subscribe because that story deserves to be heard.